$9 billion. Just let that number sink in for a second. That was the staggering peak valuation of a company that was basically built entirely on an illusion. It's a number that completely captured the imagination of Silicon Valley, the media, and some of the absolute most powerful investors in the world. But hiding behind that massive $9 billion figure was a dark secret, one that was actively putting thousands of actual human lives at risk. And that brings us to a much, much grimmer number, 135 months. That is the federal prison sentence currently being served by Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of that $9 billion mirage Theranos. You see, this isn't just your standard story about a failed tech startup. It's a full-blown true crime saga about medical fraud, immense hubris, and the downright devastating consequences of taking Silicon Valley's fake-it-till-you-make-it culture and applying it to human health.
Now, Holmes absolutely did not build this illusion alone. Take a look at this chilling internal text message from her chief operating officer, Ramesh Sunny Balwani. He wrote, "I am responsible for everything at Theranos." It just perfectly captures the intense, incredibly tight-knit control and the complicity happening at the very top of the organization. They were ruthlessly guarding a secret that they both knew could completely destroy them.
So, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to forensically dissect exactly how one of the biggest deceptions in corporate history was built, mechanically, psychologically, and financially. We're going to look at the raw data, the shocking regulatory blind spots, and the incredibly brave individuals who finally brought the whole thing crashing down. All right, let's dive right in.
Part 1. The $9 billion Mirage.
To really get how this fraud got so big, we first have to understand the pitch. And honestly, it was an incredibly seductive narrative. Elizabeth Holmes wasn't just out there selling a medical device. She was selling a revolution. She called it healthcare democratization. The promise was brilliantly simple. Make medical diagnostic testing accessible, super cheap, and completely painless for everyday people. It was a vision so attractive, so seemingly necessary that people desperately wanted it to be true. I mean, it tapped directly into a very real fear of needles and a widespread frustration with our slow, expensive healthcare system.
Think about the status quo for a second. We all know the traditional venous blood draw, right? Large needles, multiple vials of blood, and yeah, it usually hurts. Now contrast that with the Theranos promise, a capillary draw. Just a tiny, practically painless finger prick yielding a couple drops of blood collected in this little proprietary nanotainer. From that single drop, Theranos claimed they could run hundreds of comprehensive clinical tests. Now, scientifically speaking, domain experts already knew that capillary blood is contaminated with tissue fluid, making it highly unreliable for that kind of multiplex testing. But Holmes, she just ignored the science and aggressively marketed the dream anyway.
Moving on to Part 2. Inside the black box.
So how on earth did they pull it off for so long? Well, stepping inside the clandestine lockdown laboratories of Theranos reveals a shocking difference between what they promised the public and the actual private reality. Investors were always shown the Edison, this proprietary, sleek, miniaturized all-in-one analyzer. It was pitched as the magic box. But the truth? The Edison fundamentally did not work. It suffered from constant mechanical and biochemical failures. Pipettes would literally seize up, temperatures wildly fluctuated. So behind those locked doors, Theranos technicians were actually using hacked, third-party commercial machines made by legacy companies like Siemens to run the tests.
And this mechanical failure quickly snowballed into a massive clinical crisis. Because those commercial machines, they were designed for large, traditional vials of blood. They simply couldn't process the tiny microliter samples Theranos was collecting. So they came up with a totally fraudulent internal protocol. Step 1, collect the tiny finger prick sample. Step 2, heavily dilute it with saline and buffer solutions just to create enough physical liquid volume. Step 3, run that watered-down sample on the hacked machines. The obvious problem here is that diluting the blood fundamentally ruined the accuracy, creating massive analytical errors and wildly unstable, dangerous results for actual patients.
To hide these massive failures from routine quality control audits, management mandated a deeply, deeply unethical practice. Internally, it was known as repeat and delete. If an assay failed, say an STD test was only showing a 65% accuracy rate, technicians were explicitly instructed to deliberately delete the statistical outliers and repeat the data compilation until it artificially looked like a 95% success rate. They were, quite literally, mathematically manufacturing fake reliability. Now, keeping a secret of this magnitude required a seriously dark, toxic culture of intimidation. The cost of silence was immense. Labs were physically segregated so employees couldn't communicate or see the whole picture. Biometric scanners restricted who could go where. IT was constantly surveilling internal emails. Anyone who dared to question the science was marginalized, fired, or hit with ruinous legal threats and incredibly aggressive non-disclosure agreements. This immense, suffocating pressure even contributed to the tragic suicide of Theranos' chief scientist, Ian Gibbons. He knew the technology was failing but felt totally trapped by the legal intimidation. It's a truly devastating cost.
Which brings us to part 3, the star-studded illusion.
You're probably asking yourself, if the technology was a complete failure, how did Theranos manage to secure hundreds of millions of dollars in funding? Well, it started with an incredibly prestigious, almost unbelievable board of directors. We're talking former secretaries of state like George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, and highly respected military leaders like James Mattis and William Perry. But do you notice what is glaringly missing from that list? There is virtually zero medical, biochemical, or clinical laboratory expertise. This board provided massive political and social clout, but they fundamentally lacked the scientific training required to actually verify Holmes's technical claims.
And that unchecked credibility led straight to a devastating financial bloodbath. Major corporations basically abandoned their due diligence. Safeway committed nearly $400 million retrofitting their grocery stores, only to completely shelve the contract in the end. Walgreens paid a $100 million innovation fee and actually rolled out testing centers, completely ignoring massive technical red flags, before ultimately terminating the deal and settling for pennies on the dollar. Even media mogul Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million, only to eventually sell his shares back to the company for a single dollar, just so he could claim a tax write-off.
So how did these huge institutional investors miss the red flags? Well, Theranos utilized a very atypical financing strategy. Instead of pitching to specialized healthcare venture capital firms, investors who absolutely would have demanded independent peer-reviewed validation of those Edison machines, Holmes actively targeted wealthy individuals and private family offices. By completely avoiding medical VCs, she managed to bypass rigorous, independent scientific due diligence altogether. It was a classic, textbook case of the fear of missing out driving blind investment.
Part 4. Bad Blood and the Whistleblowers.
Here's the thing, though. A fraud built on physical blood tests affecting real people can only remain hidden for so long. Eventually, the wall of secrecy fractured from the inside out, and it was all thanks to a few incredibly brave truth-tellers. These whistleblowers faced intense corporate surveillance, intimidation by private investigators, and threats of total financial ruin just to expose the danger to patient health. Tyler Shultz, who actually was the grandson of board member George Shultz, exposed the data deletion practices. Erica Chung, a young lab assistant, sent a direct complaint to federal regulators that finally triggered an audit. And Alan Beam, the former lab director, explicitly confirmed that the proprietary hardware was being bypassed entirely.
Their courage, combined with the absolutely relentless reporting of Wall Street Journal investigative journalist John Carriero, triggered a rapid, cascading collapse. Let's look at the timeline. In October 2015, Carriero's bombshell article finally drops. By January 2016, federal regulators at CMS inspect the labs and officially find immediate jeopardy to patient health. By July, Holmes is outright banned from operating a lab. And in March 2018, the SEC steps in with massive civil fraud charges. Just like that, the mirage had officially evaporated.
And finally, part 5, the final verdict.
The regulatory shutdown wasn't the end of the line, not by a long shot. The federal government sought truly unprecedented criminal accountability for the founders of the Silicon Valley unicorn. In separate trials, impartial juries handed down decisive, heavy verdicts. Elizabeth Holmes was convicted of multiple counts of investor fraud and sentenced to 135 months in federal prison. Sunny Balwani faced an even steeper penalty. He was convicted of both investor fraud and patient fraud, resulting in a 155-month federal prison sentence. And just to put a bow on it, in 2025, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals firmly upheld both of their convictions and sentences, really confirming the undeniable severity of their actions.
On top of the prison time, the court ordered a staggering financial penalty, $452 million in joint restitution to be paid back to the victims of the fraud. But let's be real here. Considering Theranos was completely liquidated and its stock rendered entirely worthless, the actual likelihood of these investors and partners ever recovering those funds is incredibly slim. It is a complete and total capital wipeout.
So, what does this all mean for us? What are the actual structural lessons for Silicon Valley and corporate governance going forward? First off, we absolutely must demand actual scientific domain expertise on the boards of biotech startups. Second, independent peer-reviewed validation cannot just be optional. Third, the industry desperately needs to reject the software concept of stealth mode when you're building medical devices that directly impact human lives. And most importantly, while fake it till you make it might work perfectly fine for a new social media app, applying that ethos to healthcare isn't just bad business, it is literally a criminal act.
Which leaves us with one really big, provocative question to chew on. Will the tech ecosystem truly learn its lesson from the ashes of Theranos? Or, driven by that eternal fear of missing out, is the next billion-dollar deception already operating in stealth mode right now? It's a question every single investor, regulator, and consumer should be asking themselves today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.